All right, Workshop 6, Part 2 of Communications, Tour Procedures, and Guidelines. Um, we're going to get started on page 18, or we're going to move on to page 18 in the manual. All right, Astronomical Tours has a hands-free or Bluetooth and cell phone policy as follows. Obviously, communications between the expedition leader and the Fisherman's Wharf Reservations Office are essential. The reservation staff are your lifeline. In many cases, they're going to help you out, make them your best friend. They do a lot behind the scenes that you as an expedition leader don't know about that makes your life easier. They often also are the ones who deal with the repercussions of the situations that are created out on tour. So in some cases, you might make a decision whether it's to leave someone behind or whatever. Things out on tour, you make decisions, and in many cases it's the reservation staff who then have to deal with the passengers as they complain or they're angry or whatever. And so whatever you do out on tour, please always be mindful and respectful of the fact that your decisions have larger repercussions and that other people, particularly the people in the reservations office, often have to absorb and deal with those repercussions that you've created. So just please keep that in mind. And the reservations office, when you can keep them informed of what you're doing and what's going on, particularly if there's a situation, if you can proactively be communicating to them, it's going to help them deal with that situation and often can make what could have been a problematic situation or scenario end up being seamless and unnoticeable to passengers. So always keep that in mind and do your best to communicate with the reservations office. With that in mind, we think it's in your best interest and in the passenger's best interest to remain informed about changes and pick up information, road conditions, weather changes, park closures, things come up last minute, etc. So therefore, we require that all of our expedition leaders have a cell phone and a hands-free or Bluetooth device that they can use while driving on astronomical tours. That allows you to be in the necessary communication. It would be essentially impossible for you to operate as an astronomical expedition leader without a cell phone on any given day. The company will reimburse you up to $40 for a one-time purchase of a hands-free or Bluetooth device if you provide us with a receipt. And if you do that, we can show you how to account for that in terms of the reimbursement process. Similarly, we will reimburse you up to $30 per month for cell phone charges incurred for work. And that's for full-time expedition leaders, which translates to any expedition leader who has made themselves available for at least 20 tours a month. You'll be reimbursed up to $30 a month towards your cell phone charges. And you can turn that in, basically you turn in a copy of the first couple sheets of your cell phone bill each month. At the end of the month, you'll fill out an expense report and just put that on there, and you'll get reimbursed on your monthly reimbursement check up to $30. And we can give you more detail on how to do that paperwork. Child Safety Seat Law, effective January 1st, 2012. California state law was updated, and our new state law states that children need a booster seat if they are under 8 years of age and less than 4'9" in height. They have to meet both conditions to be required to have a booster seat. So that means that a child who is 9 but under 4'9" does not need a seat. It also means that a child who is 7 but is 5 feet or more also does not need a seat. To need a seat, they must be both under 8 and under 4'9". And there's also no longer a weight restriction on that law. The reservations office sends out notes with booking confirmations to passengers whenever there's a child listed on a pickup list, whenever a reservation includes a child, that triggers a note sent to the passengers that explains California law, kind of gives them a heads up of what they need to know. And our goal is that passengers provide their own child seats or their own booster seats, and that they're informed of what they need. Um, Reservation agents also will inform passengers how they can rent a child seat while they're in San Francisco. It's always best to have passengers bring their own seats and connect their own seats, hook them up. Just there's some liability issues if we're providing the seats or if we're the ones that are attaching them. It's not to say that you can't offer to help someone with that process, but really the passengers, the parents should be the ones doing the work there. So that is our child safety seat law. We do have here at the warehouse, at the Astronomical Warehouse, a child seat and a booster seat that we keep down in the driver's desk area. Our goal is to not use that very much. We really don't want to put those out on offer. They're just there sort of as a backup, but on occasion, the reservations office will make those available to passengers, and they'll make a note of that on your pickup list. But in general, we're doing our best to avoid using those and trying to get our passengers to bring their own seats. After the tour and fueling policy, this is on page 18 of the manual. So it's astronomical policy that we ask all of our guides to fuel up at approved of locations and gas stations unless there's an emergency. So for each tour, for the most part, we have a specific gas station that we use, and we want you to go to that gas station. We don't want you to just go anywhere and fuel up anywhere. We've selected specific gas stations for specific reasons, whether it's logistical reasons or pricing, etc. So generally, we expect that you will fuel up at the gas station that's been approved, and you should be directed to that gas station when you're first trained on any given tour. The exception might be on the city tour, where there's not necessarily a specific gas station that you fill up at. And that goes to sort of a general theme that hopefully we're communicating in this manual generally, that for the most part when you're on tour, our expectation is that you stick to the format. You go to the approved stops. On the Yosemite tour, it's in Oakdale at the Raley's Market, or the Safeway in Turlock if you're doing the Highway 140 winter route. You stop at the Yosemite Lodge up in Yosemite Valley. You park at the appropriate parking lots. And these things should be addressed as you train for each tour. We've put these itineraries in place for a very specific reason, and we don't want our guides to be winging it and making extra stops. We have had issues in the past with guides making stops that were not included on the itinerary in various locations on tours, and that doesn't line up with what we have presented as the itinerary, and so we do not allow that. So yeah, also at the end of the day, when you're finished with your tour, it could be a morning tour, but at the end of your tour, call the office, the reservations office, to let us know that you're back safe and sound and parked at the warehouse. So our expectation on communication, we may have already talked about this, is that you're communicating a number of times over the course of your day and your tour. And so we do expect at the end of your tour that you check in. The reservations office has a set of procedures in place where they check you into a tour. They check you in before the tour to make sure you're awake in the morning. They check you in once you have checked out with them. I should say they check you out so that they know that you have all your passengers, you've done your head count, and you're beginning your tour. And we've already talked about the importance of doing that. You absolutely, every single day, every single tour, without exception, before you start your tour, at your last pickup, when you know you have the correct number of people and you've done your head count, you absolutely must call in to the reservations office so they know that you've got all your people. That is our main defense against leaving people behind and missing people on their pickups. Excuse me. Um, and then at the end of your tour, we want to know that you got back safe and sound, and you're done for the day. Um, if, for instance, on a Yosemite trip, you could conceivably be getting back beyond 10 p.m. Generally, you should be back before that. But if things didn't go exactly as planned and you're coming back a little bit late, our reservations office generally closes at 10 p.m. 10 p.m. Excuse me. And so if you know you're going to be back to the warehouse and finishing after 10 p.m., try to give them a call, a quick call, just to let them know that where you are and that you'll be getting back approximately what time, so that they can do the checkout for you, because they're essentially waiting to leave, to hear from you before they can leave and close up. It is also astronomical policy that you fuel up. Well, I've already said at approved locations and stations. That's unless there's an emergency. If you know, if it's. I didn't mention also, just as a side note, the two tours that really there are no defined gas stations are the Wine Lovers Tour, because you don't have a set route, and the City Tour, because you don't necessarily have a set order to which you're doing your route. And those are the exceptions. But otherwise, specific gas stations, I've already talked about that. Another part of our fueling policy is that you should never end your tour without leaving your vehicle with at least a half a tank of gas. We're always trying to think ahead for the next person who's going to be using that vehicle for a tour. We want that vehicle not only to be clean and ready for them, but we want it to be fueled up such that they have enough fuel to get through their day. And so generally, you always want to be thinking about the next person, and leaving any vehicle at the end of your tour in the manner that you would want to find a vehicle when you start your tour. So you want it to be clean. You want the seats to be in the right position. You want the seats to be brushed off. You want it to be very presentable, but you also want at least a half a tank of gas. So our policy on the fueling, specifically, as I've already mentioned, is to fill the tank at the approved stations. Leave the vehicle with as full a tank as makes sense. That is to say, don't just leave it right at half a tank and not fuel up. For the most part, we want you to fuel up on every tour at the approved locations if possible. But at the minimum requirement is that you never leave a vehicle with less than half a tank, because for most tours, the driver's going to need at least a half a tank to really get through that first part of their day until they get to their designated fueling station. Winery relations. We have developed working business relationships with all the wineries that we visit on our Muir Woods and Wine Country tour. And even on the Wine Lovers Tour, even though you're not going to designated wineries, you're developing an itinerary on the day. This goes back to something we talked about earlier, where as an expedition leader for Astronomical Tours, you're an ambassador for the company out on the road, and we want to be positively viewed by the winery industry, by all the places we visit, the national parks, etc. We want everyone that we're visible to view us as a company that operates in a respectful fashion and in a responsible fashion. And so you're the people that are out there leading the tours, and your behavior and adherence to the policies and procedures that all of these organizations have in place is what sets the example that our company is viewed by out there. So part of that, and specifically when it comes to wineries, is that we want to maintain good relationships with the wineries we visit regularly on our Muir Woods and Wine Country tour, and even wineries we visit sporadically on other tours. In order to do that, one of the things you'll definitely want to not do is don't no-show or cancel at the last minute if you've got a winery appointment. That really throws the wineries off, in the same way that we expect our passengers to show up when they've booked a tour with us, and if they don't show up, that really messes with our operations. Same with the wineries. They have other tours they're scheduling. They have the public that they're dealing with. As best you can, um, show up on time for your appointments, but certainly do not just no-show. That's very frustrating to them, and try not to cancel at the last minute. And also, before you do anything regarding winery appointments on the Muir Woods and Wine Country tour, you want to discuss any changes you might need to make to your schedule with the reservations office, and get approval from the manager on duty. So if you think you're going to be late to one of your winery appointments, one, don't just show up late, but also don't just call the winery and let them know. Let the reservations office know as well, and engage the reservations office in the process of adjusting your schedule or making any changes to your schedule. And again, I've kind of already mentioned this, but always call the winery if you're behind schedule. Just to wrap it up with winery relations, we do work pretty hard to keep our relationships with these wineries going, and they have other business that they have to attend to, and so we just need to absolutely respect not our appointments, but also our behavior at the wineries, both our drivers, our guides, but also our passengers to a certain degree. You are bringing our passengers to the wineries and other institutions, other places that we visit, and up to a point, you're responsible for their behavior. And so you need to sort of make sure that your passengers aren't getting too drunk, aren't misbehaving, aren't disrespecting staff at the wineries, and etc. And if scenarios present themselves where passenger behavior is getting out of hand, part of your job is to attempt to address that. And you can also get a manager on duty involved in assisting you with that, but really you're the front line, and you need to take a certain level of responsibility for the behavior of your passengers. And that's something that will definitely help us maintain positive relationships with the staff at the wineries and other organizations we visit. And if they ask you to do something, if they request your assistance with something, you should definitely do what they ask. You're visiting their premises, and so you need to respect their rules and guidelines. Thank you for that. Before I get into some of the tour minimum expectations, something that is not actually on the slide here, but I wanted to mention, is the use of carpool and bus lanes on the Golden Gate and Bay Bridge as you enter and leave the city for your tours. We want to use the carpool lane, not the non-stop fast track lane on the Golden Gate Bridge during the weekdays from 4 to 6 p.m. And always use the bus lane on the Bay Bridge, which is off to the far right. That saves us money. Our fast track gets billed, and so if you don't do that, we're going to get charged a higher amount. Also, generally, it's going to help you get through faster. On the Golden Gate Bridge specifically, and I know this is actually true on the Bay Bridge as well, the bus lanes are wider, and so in a van, but especially if you're in a Lux van or a bus, which are wider vehicles, it can be a very tight fit getting through the regular lanes, and you don't really want to take that chance. So our policy is that you always use the bus lanes, even in a van, and carpool lanes during carpool hours for sure on the Golden Gate Bridge, because that saves us money. So I think that is it on that one. Moving on to the minimum expectations for a Yosemite tour. On a Yosemite tour, please make sure that you're giving our guests a minimum of 5 hours in the park. That's what we advertise. And so that means no less than 5 hours from the time your receipt at the gate indicates that you entered the park to the time you pass through that gate or whatever exit gate you use. So 5 hours from the entry to the park to the departure from the park at the gates of the park. That's what we're doing. And so you need to, we have a general schedule for the tour, but if you arrive a little bit early or a little bit late, you need to adjust your departure time from the park to make certain that you're providing at least 5 hours in the park. So if on a given day you arrive into Yosemite at 10:30, you're half an hour early, you need to be leaving Yosemite no earlier than 3:30. But if you're, say, on another day you don't get into the park till noon, that would be a pretty bad day. That would be pretty far behind schedule. But if that were to happen, you'd want to make sure you're not passing through the exit gate until 5 o'clock, so you get those 5 hours. In the park as well, you only want to stop for photo stops and your lunch breaks at park-approved parking areas. Stopping at non-approved areas, approved spots, such as the short turnout on the east end of the long tunnel on Highway 120, is unsafe and it's against the regulations. And so there are very specific places we are allowed to park, and most of the places where cars park, we are not allowed to park as commercial operators. And we absolutely need to respect that, not only because it's the safe and right thing to do, but also because if we do not follow the guidelines and expectations of the Park Service, that puts our commercial license in jeopardy, and we could have our national park permit pulled. And as you might imagine, that would have a dramatic, severe impact on our ability to do business. So when you're being trained on the Yosemite tour, you will be shown where you can park, and really you don't want to get away from that. You want to stick to the specific spots that you know are approved spots and not go anywhere else. And the rangers are pretty strict on that. They will cite you, they'll let us know, so it's not something to be taken lightly. One of the main sources of problems in Yosemite with regards to parking is the Yosemite Village store. We are absolutely not allowed to park at the Yosemite Village store and in that general area. You're not even able to drop passengers off. So the Yosemite Lodge is where we are officially allowed to load and unload, and that's where we go. The one exception would be if you have passengers on your tour who are overnight passengers who have reservations at the Ahwahnee Hotel. You can drive back to the Ahwahnee Hotel and drop them off there. That's the one exception. We also have, on the Yosemite tour, we sell overnight packages. Our passengers will ride up with one tour, do the first half of the tour with one tour on one day. That driver would be dropping them off at the Yosemite Lodge, and then they might stay 1, 2, 3 or more nights at a number of different lodgings in and just outside of the park. And then they'll pick up the second half of the tour on their day of departure. And so in these cases, we are only dropping off and picking up at the Yosemite Lodge, and our designated pickup time that these passengers are being told is 3 p.m. 3 p.m. The reason we only pick up at the lodge is, one, there is a payphone there that we can call so that the front desk can try to find the passengers if we cannot. The reservations office can call to the lodge, and they can employ their assistants to find these missing passengers. There's a place that we can always park. We're allowed to park at the Yosemite Lodge. There is also a warm, dry place that's available to the public where our passengers can wait with restrooms, etc. Um, when you have passengers that you're dropping off in Yosemite who are doing an overnight, you want to warn them that if they are late, they need to call our office, our reservations office, and that they may have to catch a bus from the Yosemite Lodge at 3:45 back to San Francisco at their own expense, or they may have to stay an additional night at their own expense because we can only wait a limited amount of time. You never want to leave the valley without collecting all of your passengers or getting an approval from a manager on duty in the office. So we absolutely do not, as expedition leaders, we don't make the decision as to whether we are leaving someone behind in the park. That's a major thing, to leave someone behind in the park, because, as I've just mentioned, it requires them to catch a bus on their own at their own expense or stay another night. And so until you've had communication with our reservations office and gotten approval to leave, if you're missing a passenger, you want to stick around and wait. Um, yeah, that's that. So the minimum expectations for the Muir Woods and Wine Country tour. We generally we preset, well, every day we preset winery appointments on our standard Muir Woods and Wine Country tour. Um, that tour could have a second vehicle, and potentially, I don't know if it's ever happened before, but a third vehicle going, in which case you might have some alternate appointments. But these appointments are arranged and preset for you by our reservations office. Um, that is done because with groups of our size, you can't just show up at any winery. And in the past, we've had some problems where securing appointments. So we've got our winery partners who have agreed to accept our groups, and we set those appointments based on the itinerary that we make public. Um, so it's important that you call the wineries if you're running behind schedule. They need to know that. I've already kind of talked about this a little bit in a previous slide, but definitely worth mentioning again. Um, and what I like to do personally is I call each winery a little bit before I arrive, usually about 15, 20 minutes before I arrive, even if I'm on time, just to let them know that I'm on time, or I'm a little ahead of schedule, or a little behind schedule, whatever. And that gives them the heads up that I'm about to arrive there. And that just generally creates a positive relationship with them. They know you're responsible when you're calling in. So I like to do that. You don't need to do that, but at minimum, we absolutely, if you're behind schedule, try not to be. Do your best to stick to the schedule as much as possible, but you don't always have control over that. So if you're running behind, definitely let them know. And as I mentioned previously, also get the Fisherman's Wharf, excuse me, not the Fisherman's Wharf, the reservations office involved if you have to alter your appointments. Let's say you got out of town really late in the morning, or you lost someone in Muir Woods and you got really significantly behind schedule, such that your appointments need to be rearranged. You don't want to do that on your own. You want to get the reservations office involved in assisting you, and you want to have manager on duty approval for any significant changes to your schedule. But if it's just a matter of being a little bit late to one of the wineries, you just call them ahead and let them know so that they can do whatever adjustments they need. And you are not authorized to change the scheduled wine stops. Again, that has to be run through our reservations office with manager approval before anything gets changed or canceled. The wineries get very frustrated with us if we make too many changes, and especially if they're last minute changes. So keep that in mind. Also, promote sales and good relationships with our winery partners. So always remember that the wineries, we've developed these partnerships with wineries that we feel do a very good job in terms of the service they provide, the experience they offer, and we think that they generally represent wine country well to our passengers. But they are a business, and they are there to sell. First and foremost, they're there to sell the wine, and we should do our part as expedition leaders to promote that. And so there's various ways that you can sort of prime your passengers to buy wine. You don't want to be pushing them too hard. That's not our job. Um, we just want to let them know in a sort of a kind and diplomatic way that the wineries are in the business of selling wine. So keep that in mind. We also ask that you fill out the wine purchases portion of your daily expense sheet. I've already talked about that a little bit. Actually, I will be talking about that later in the presentation when I go over the accounting sheet, but we're asking that expedition leaders on the Muir Woods and Wine Country Tour specifically that you try to keep track of the amount of wine sold at each winery. And you'll get more detail on that when we go over the accounting sheet, but we do ask that you do that. Thanks. Vehicle tracking. We have a tracking system, a GPS tracking system called GTI on all of our vehicles. And the reason we have this is, well, there are multiple reasons. The system can do all of the following. It can monitor the speed of a vehicle. It can monitor the vehicle location, so we know where that vehicle is at all times. It's got a remote door unlocking function, which has come in handy on many occasions. And it's got remote vehicle disabling. So if a vehicle is stolen, we can just shut that vehicle down and it won't work. And these are all useful functions. The speed monitoring, obviously, is so that we know that our drivers are not out there going too fast. And so this is a good opportunity to offer a reminder. We've talked about this before. Safety is our first, second, third most important priority at this company. And our company policy, which is in line with the law, is that speeding is absolutely prohibited. So you've got all these people whose lives are depending on your safe driving, and for every mile an hour over the speed limit you go, you're increasing the danger and the reaction time you'd need to avoid danger in your vehicle. So another thing to consider is safe driving your passengers, because I've talked about this before, everything you do out on tour is on display. And your passengers, as they evaluate your performance as a tour guide and as a driver, they're watching everything. And so they're going to be watching how well you drive. And if you're driving too fast, that's going to make a lot of people insecure, and that likely will lower their estimation of your performance, might result in a negative review online, but it also might affect your tipping. So be a safe driver, obey the law and company policy, and don't speed. And we know if you're speeding, and we will pursue disciplinary action if any of our expedition leaders is found to be speeding regularly. The monitoring of the vehicle location helps us, of course. Best use of that is for the reservation staff when you're doing your morning pickups. In the old days, before we had this GPS system, they used to have to call the driver to check in periodically so that they could let waiting passengers know how long it might take. They no longer have to do that, so they don't have to bother you while you're doing your pickups. They can just look at the GPS, see where you are, and estimate a time as to when you might be at a later pickup. So that's super helpful for them, for the reservation staff. The remote door unlocking is also very useful. It saved many drivers many times when you accidentally lock the key in the vehicle. And so assuming there is access, internet access, or I should say cell phone access, the door can be unlocked. And that's personally saved me at least once. And then the remote vehicle disabling, obviously, this kind of speaks for itself. There are some places up in Yosemite and even in Muir Woods where the GPS doesn't work because we don't have cell reception. But for the most part, it's very useful, very helpful, and know that it's on every vehicle. And the intention is not to be watching you like Big Brother, but it does help us make sure that we remain safe. Um, so slow down and be safe. And yeah, I think that's it. Thank you. After hours emergencies. If there are after hours emergencies and you cannot reach the reservations office, um, which the phone number is 415-357-0700. Here are a few numbers you'll want to have programmed into your cell phone, and this is the order you'd want to call these numbers in. These are cell phone numbers for individual managers. First is the MOD phone number. So this is definitely one you're going to want to have in your cell phone programmed in. And this phone number follows whoever's assigned to the manager on duty status at that time. Um, so you can should be the first number that you call in case of an after hours emergency or in case of an emergency where you cannot get a hold of the reservations office. So MOD phone number 415-967-1844. A manager on duty should be available at that number 24 hours a day. If that doesn't work, then you'd want to call the Julie, the Director of Operations. Her phone number is 415-368-5014. And then, again, if that one, you've tried the reservations number, you've tried the MOD number, you've tried Julie's number, then you'd call Kelsey at 415-705-9031. She's the reservations manager. And then, worst case scenario, if that doesn't work, then you would call the tour operations manager at 510-388-8584. That's Beto. And then finally, the absolute last resort, if no one else is available, you'd call the owner, Rodrigo, at 510-915-1010. And so again, the manager on duty phone number is always transferring to whoever's assigned to that responsibility.